I think that this election cycle is being very much dependent on news broken online. And as you mentioned with Medill Fowler, she's a woman, she was in her 60s, never trained as a reporter, quite partisan, an admitted Obama voter, and a community college English professor who attended an Obama fundraiser in San Francisco and asked him a question, recorded what came out, and broke news. Now, she's not a reporter in any traditional sense. She certainly won't be taking the place of many of the reporters, certainly foreign correspondents. She's not going to be uncovering rampant corruption. She won't be conducting multi-month investigations. But she did break legitimate news, and it was the sort of news that has affected the campaign cycle. I think one of the things that we've seen with the internet that's been part of this sort of larger inclusion, this opening up, which is one of the reasons that younger people, I've sensed, and this is more anecdotal than anything else, have been more engaged in it, is this sense that they can participate, that it's actually a conversation, that it's not a one-way street. I joined the Huffington Post after a few years at the Sun-Times, and know firsthand what Tom was talking about how hard it is now for some of the local and regional and non-national papers to sort of rejigger their focus. It's incredibly hard, and one of the biggest frustrations that many of us have at the Sun-Times that isn't evident at online news sites is that you're actually engaged with your readers, that there's immediate feedback, that you can respond accordingly. In many ways, newspapers, even the most nimble of them, and this can at times be a virtue, function more like big steamships, and it's hard to turn them around. Whereas a website, even one that grows, something like the Huffington Post, which most certainly is becoming, taking on some of the aspects of more traditional news gathering, can turn on a dime. If something breaks, we can immediately cover it and turn everything around for it. If we want to change the format, it can look different. And that can be based as much on reader input, comments, our own sense of how people use the site, of how people are consuming their news, as it is anything else. And that dynamic, being far more fluid, I think has helped it resonate. That's something that people increasingly look for as they consume news. In fact, consuming might not even be the right term, they're engaging in many more ways. And so they expect a certain fluidity. A site like Talking Points memo that Tom mentioned earlier has actually taken that one step further, and it's outsourced elements of its reporting. It has a very intelligent, in some instances inside the Beltway readership, that has taken on the data dumps that a lot of traditional papers rely on an investigative reporting team or computer-assisted reporters to do, to break down a lot of that data for them, and then their reporters can make sense of what they have. It allows the readers to feel far more a part of what they're involved in than a traditional paper, which is not to say that a lot of newspapers, the Washington Post, I think, heads and tails above the New York Times, most certainly, and many, many others. Lynn Sweet doing a wonderful job at the Sun-Times, too. They're not mired in it in the least bit. I think that a lot of the political websites of the national sites are really doing tremendous work. There's a recognition that news happens sort of every moment, that people are as interested in new news as they are its sort of merits, that they're willing to kind of make decisions for themselves on what matters, and they want as much information as possible so they can cull from it. So a lot of the sites, a lot of the political blogs, like The Trail, like The Caucus, and a host of other offshoots, have done a great job doing these sorts of real-time report notebook dumps that Tom was mentioning. What the Huffington Post and other sites do is sort of amplify that. We'll find take a lot of the really good reporting that's out there from both our reporters who may be live at an event, but from the host of other reporters from traditional network television, from cable news outlets, from partisan ones and from thoroughly objective ones, and condense all of it into a sort of a constantly updated grab bag. So we're not relying entirely on he said or she said, but finding precisely what's in that speech that may have played off of something that was a big story earlier. We can give actual transcripts. People can watch as it happens. It's sort of, we don't have the legacy of a traditional paper, so we've always been thinking of the user's experience. I guess when something happens, you want to be able to watch it happen. The internet has created an expectation that you can be there as it happens. You can comment as it happens. You can immediately assess its impact. And what a lot of sites that have been created and really gained momentum just for this election, which is very much the first internet election. I mean, YouTube has played a larger role, I imagine, than perhaps any other single development. I imagine that the real heavy lifting done by serious journalists, that they won't be replaced. As Megan said, so long as you are the best at what you do, there will be work for you. Now, whether it's lucrative or there'll be many opportunities, I don't know. One of the scariest things is that there seem to be dwindling positions for those who are quite good. Here in Chicago, for instance, the downsizing of the Chicago Reader, the venerable Alternative Weekly, they cut a number of their very best investigative reporters, those who did some of the most substantial work, the very traditional, what we like to think of as constitutionally protected governmental watchdog investigations. And to lose them was incredibly scary because it sent a sign that we don't value the most traditional tenet of journalism. The best papers haven't gone in that direction, which is wonderful. And aggregated sites, of which the Huffington Post is certainly one of them, though we're doing increasing amounts of reporting, are entirely dependent upon that good work. The citizen journalists have done some really interesting, great things. In the mildest sense, they've just brought a lot of fresh perspective to what are too often sort of stale newsrooms and ways of looking at elections and covering things. They are willing to ask a lot of questions that some reporters may feel would compromise professional friendship and aren't particularly worried about sources. And they're much more in tune with how they are immediately affected. At the Huffington Post, there's been this thing called the Off the Bus Project, which is not really a part of the main site, though it's under the same rubric. And it has been this large collective effort to get reporters in all 50, or citizen journalists in all 50 states to just kind of cover the campaign as they see fit. To file dispatches, to cover events, to report about their experiences, even volunteering, just to weigh in. There's some opinion, there's lots of reporting, there's some data crunch. Now, those, should they have anything resembling a traditional scoop, it's still not going to be the sort of thing that's covered on the Huffington Post front page. But it's a great way to get other perspectives, and perspectives that may be lost. Too often in a very traditional story, whether it's a local crime story or even covering the Iowa caucus, you wind up with man-on-the-street tidbits that are not particularly revealing. That's not any fault of the reporters. You only have so much time. You have an incredibly tight inch count, and here's 6 people, and only 2 of them said something reasonably coherent, and that's the quote you could work in. When you're not dealing with those constraints, and when it's the person who saw it through their own eyes, it can be wonderful and really illuminating. That's not going to take the place, however, of really serious government watchdog reporting. And I don't say that to denigrate lots and lots of citizens who aren't trained, who aren't credentialed, who don't make their living in journalism, but who do have very serious personal efforts and blogs that do what they can to keep an eye on not just politicians, but corporations or local companies, or just sort of serve a more traditional town crier function. Now,